Well, there is a bill to get rid of the Department of Education in the US Senate right now. So I wanted to cover today, I wanted to actually do a video on what even the US Department of Education does, but this came a lot quicker than I expected. So first off, I'm Dr. Kara. I'm a school psychologist, and I try to do content related to education policy and how that'll affect children and youth across the United States. And usually I talk about kids kind of from all ranges, but this one is going to be about rural kids the most because changes here will probably affect kids in rural areas the most. So let's get started. What is it? How is it going to impact us? What even is in there? So to start off, I just want to talk about what is the Department of Education at that federal level and what does it do. So it originally started because we had states who were in charge of education individually in their states. And we were wondering, what is the best way to educate children? And we didn't really know because everybody was doing something different. So in 1867, we first developed the Department of Education in its original form to see what is the best way to educate children and bring together kind of all of the different aspects that we've been exploring across all the states as they were all administering education to children. So that makes sense. Everybody was doing something different. What was the best way? We need a federal government level initiative to try to figure that out. And it has evolved over time a lot. So since then, for example, in World War II, after that happened, we got the GI Bill. That was through the Department of Education, and then veterans could get some money to go to college. In the Cold War, we built better math and science instruction through the Department of Education to make sure that our children were going to be competitive in the field of math and science relative to other folks from other countries. And in the 60s and 70s, which is where my job as a school psychologist, a lot of our stuff comes from, is the 60s and 70s brought special education reform and reform for individuals with disabilities as a whole. So during this time, we saw the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as we now know it, IDEA, which started as the Education for All Handicapped Children. We also saw regulations around the Americans with Disabilities Act, where we might call that a Section 504 accommodation in schools, where students with a disability can get accommodations that just help them access the environment, but don't need specially designed instruction. So we have all these different things coming together in initiatives that are now housed in the Department of Education. And for example, it currently requires schools and universities to, for example, set standards for academic progress and assess that progress in students over time, yearly, inform the public about performance. So in Ohio, we have the Ohio Report Cards where you can look up your district and see how they're doing, and have drug-free schools is another example, and protect privacy of school records through FERPA, make special education programming, put in place different funding and grants, and helps with all kinds of higher ed funding too, with like Pell Grants. So it does a lot of stuff, and that's not an exhaustive list either. And it puts in a lot of funding for K-12 education. The percentage might not be that large, but what they put forth does help us. And you might be wondering, so what's this bill going to do? Is Department of Education gone? Is special education destroyed? Not quite, but I do have questions and concerns. So Senator Rounds from South Dakota is the one who proposed this bill. It doesn't even have a full text yet on the website, as they're still figuring things out, but somebody got a full text from it. And it's only 7 pages long. And if you think about all the things that I just said and more that the Department of Education does, you might wonder, how can you cover everything in 7 pages? You can't really, and that's where I have a lot of concerns. So Ed Week did a write-up about this, about what some of the major concerns are, and I just wanted to kind of, first off, where is some of these things going to end up, and what's missing from the bill that I'm really concerned about, especially for those kids in rural districts where I come from in particular. So, for example, the Treasury is going to be in charge of student loans, and then all the stats that the Department of Education currently collects on K-12 education will go into the Treasury as well, supposedly. It wasn't exactly clear what's going to be collected by whom. For example, in research, we have Institution for Education Sciences, which provides grants for innovations in education and teaching and coaching and helping teachers, all those kinds of things. I don't know if they mean that research or just research on our K-12 schools and how they're doing. So I'm not sure where that's going to go. I've had jobs that are funded through IES. A lot of folks do, and it's a good resource to put into schools. So I'm not sure if that's going to the Department of the Treasury and we'll have to, get grants through them or what. And, stats like the stats where we talk about reading scores and math scores, that currently is brought forth from the Department of Education, and supposedly that will be in the Treasury now, because the Treasury will be in charge of providing block grants of federal funding to states, and states will have to go through the Treasury and say that they're meeting criteria to get those grants. But we'll talk about those grants in a second. So the Civil Rights Office will be taking over special education, so anything under the title of IDEA, and I might need to do a video on IDEA all in of itself, but it's what provisions special education in the United States. All of that is going into the Office for Civil Rights, along with Section 504, which provides additional accommodations, like I said, and Title IX. So Title IX deals with discrimination for women in public settings, so that is also going to be into Civil Rights Office. Health and Human Services is taking over a lot of other things related to education, and just taking over, I believe anything under like every student succeeds under some titles will go to Health and Human Services. But like I said, it's only 7 pages long. It doesn't cover everything. And this is the huge problem, is that there are block grants now that this bill proposes to send to states. So states, can opt in or opt out of federal regulations and receive funding, but there are some grants that go to schools that have high needs, for example. So some schools with low socioeconomic status can ask for this money to get more teachers, because if you're funded through local taxes and your taxes aren't high enough to support more teachers, but you have more kids, you might be able to get money through the federal government to get more teachers in lower class sizes, or hire more principals, or whatever it might be. Get better, academic intervention services, for example. But all of that money will now be pulled into just one single grant that will be given to the states, and the states will allocate that money. So there are a couple things that aren't talked about in this bill that are concerning, and Ed Week did a good job of talking about this, but the first one is Title I money to schools with low socioeconomic status. Over 2,000 schools in my state of Ohio, including rural schools, received money through Title I. We know from other talkings like Project 2025 that they want to cut Title I funding as it is and then give that money to states. So, for example, if you're a rural school and you get money from Title I and you get to hire more teachers and pay their salaries because of it, that money might now go away because the state can do what they want with it. So, for example, if you're in a state where private vouchers are sucking up a lot of public education funds, perhaps some of those funds will go to the vouchers instead of your Title I teachers. Along with that, Title II helps with training and recruitment of high-quality teachers and principals, and also helps with, evidence-based programs like reading programs and math programs. And again, low socioeconomic areas are the ones who are on the priority list to get this funding. And just so folks understand, I looked it up for Ohio because Ohio has different typologies for schools. We have major groupings in rural, small town, suburban, and urban. And a part of those is further descriptors about high poverty, average poverty, or low poverty. The two rural categories, which account for over 200 schools, are either average poverty or high poverty. No low poverty rural schools exist. And for small town, we have average we don't have average. We have low student poverty, which is about 100 schools. And then we have high poverty, so 89 schools. So over 300 schools in Ohio in rural or small town settings are average or high poverty schools. who are likely getting funding through Title I and Title II to receive funding. And this is the same across other states too. We are not even the highest state in terms of usage of title funds. So even when we have that many school districts getting money through title programs, you can think of other states who are getting more funding from us, from the United States federal government, and how that's going to impact them a lot. And the quality of education that will be received by rural students if they do not have access to the money to have more teachers, lower class sizes, evidence-based interventions, because those cost money. You have to usually purchase those materials because the state might decide not to fund you anymore. And if they cut that money, then even if they decide to fund you, then you just won't have the same amount of money as you did before. And finally, Title III. So all these titles are funding mechanisms, essentially. And Title III works with English language learning students. So it helps fund programs to help immigrant children learn English and be in our schools and integrate into our schools. And just for reference, Ohio, which nobody thinks of as like an immigrant-heavy state until maybe recently, we have over 90 languages represented in our state for immigrant children, and over 80,000 immigrant children who are qualifying as English language learners. And so if you are a school who has been serving these students and you want money to build programming and hire teachers who are capable of doing this, maybe too bad. This money is, again, going to be put in that block grant, and the state can do whatever they want with it. So maybe they'll fund you, and maybe you won't, and you'll have to find money elsewhere. And if you failed to pass a levy this year, maybe that's going to be really hard. But that's kind of the major concern. And it's funny that this coincides with other folks talking a lot about voucher programs, both on the federal level and state levels for a lot of folks. And we're now seeing that we're going to put this big block grant towards education funding in states, and we want school vouchers to exist. So that just seems like more money is going to get funneled into school vouchers. And I did another video that includes school vouchers, and you might have seen that on TikTok, where school vouchers really, in Ohio especially, aren't even serving rural students because we don't even have private schools in a lot of rural counties. So it just seems like a way to funnel money away from taxpayers who want their kids to go to public schools and just funneling it into private schools. So that's a real concern. So if you have a child who attends a school with Title I, II, or III funding, you might need to be really concerned about this and get ready to talk to your school board and your Ohio legislature about where this funding is going to go if this were to pass. Now, I'm pretty skeptical of it passing right now because I don't think they would have a majority to pass it, but this has been talked about a lot in the past election cycle, that we're just going to get rid of the Department of Education. We're not really sure how we're going to do it or what we're going to do. And if you look at something like Project 2025, which we're now more convinced that it actually is a policy plan, it talks about more than the Department of Education, but it pretty much just says shoving everything into Health and Human Services or the civil rights area or the Justice Department, and then cutting the budget for it. So, yeah, I'm really concerned what's going to happen to our schools and the kids at those schools whenever we take away this money, because there's no guarantees of what the state's going to do with it. So that's kind of the big thing, and we'll have to just kind of wait and see what else comes out about this because it's super new. So if you are concerned about this, maybe it's a good time to talk to your local school board about funding. You can look up if your school is title funded or not, and if the monies are helping your children, maybe it's time to talk to our representatives. In the spring, they'll be talking about budgeting, and then it might be time to say, hey, I want budgeting to go where it used to go for all the title schools, including mine.